Great, thank you, and hello everybody, and welcome to our webcast, Data Analytics for Effective Trade Promotion Management. My name is Ben Dunmire. I'm a data analytics consultant with Thorogood, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Deb Lee. And both of us have quite a bit of experience working in consumer goods and retail space, particularly with data engineering, data science, MLOps projects. So we're going to bring some of the experiences here today to talk about trade promotion management. Quick look at the agenda, just a few sections here. I'll briefly talk about Thorogood, and then I'll jump into a bit of the reasons why we talk about trade promotion, some of the opportunity there in taking advantage of data and using some advanced techniques. Deb will dive into a few examples of kind of things that we built, things that we're seeing at customers, and give a view of some demos there. And then I'll wrap up with a few closing thoughts and a quick demo as well. But I'll jump into it. For those of you not familiar, Thorogood's a independent global data analytics specialist firm focusing on strategy, solutions, and services that we help our customers in the space. We're a global company, so based in Philadelphia. Deb and I are, and also offices in Boston, London, Bangalore, Singapore, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. Our consultants are recruited and trained in the same way to develop a unique mix of skills, blending business understanding in the form of industry and functional experience with strong technical aptitude, and then a deep understanding of analytical tools and processes and techniques. And as shown on screen, we do offer a full range of BI and analytics services, so that includes strategy and roadmaps, requirements and design, implementation, training support, and lots of others. In terms of what we work with and technologies that we kind of are accustomed to using, we are an independent firm, meaning we don't work with a single vendor or single technology, but do partner with a lot of the players in the space. And thinking about the management of trade spend and trade promotions, there's lots of high volumes of data, lots of interfaces with different systems and technologies. And that really demands that you have a very good understanding of how different technologies and systems integrate with one another, your design of data pipelines and data storage. And then ultimately, where we see a lot of opportunity is how you're able to do that well and then apply different analytical tools and techniques, machine learning, machine MLOps applications to be able to enhance decision making and just be kind of more effective at the management of trade promotions. That being said, let me open a little bit to talk about really where we see the opportunity and why trade promotions is a common thing that people are talking about now with data analytics. So we do know that the amount of trade spend that consumer goods manufacturers will spend every year is particularly high, is a large proportion of revenue. And it makes a lot of sense. They're trying to evolve their business, grow their business, and make investments where they make sense. And then for the retailers, so the ones that are kind of the receivers of that trade spend, there's really a lot of pressure to get the right deal in the right place and time. They're taking on a lot of overhead. There's a lot of competition for the best promotions. That's when we're going to a store, we might decide which store we go to based on the promotions that are running and what's on sale and how good that sale is. So there's really a lot on the line. There's human capital, actual capital, and it's important to get it. And a few of the bubbles up here, just kind of why it matters, why we talk about it, where we see the opportunity. I mentioned the negotiations that are pretty tense. There's a lot of value and differentiation I think you can bring to the table if you can evidence things with data and analytics, with cited information that says this is what we think will happen and this is why, to make that case for this promotion or that promotion. There's a terrible large amount of people that are involved in personas that you have to think about. And it's not just at the consumer goods, the manufacturer, the supplier, but also at the retailer, the actual vendor. There's people focused on selling on the customer side. There's people focused on planning promotions. There's focused on kind of the top line and the bottom line. So how do you support all of them from a data perspective and provide insights to the right people at the right granularity with the right timeliness? Something that particularly driven by the pandemic over the past year and a half is changes in shopper behavior and maybe most evidenced by the change in channels. So we've seen e-commerce and growing, and then retailers with an omni approach, seeing that online business really growing, and that changes how we promote, where we promote, and why people are promoting. So it's pretty interesting. And maybe to sum it all together, it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of data that we can look at. It's a complicated process to think about with all the different interchanges and people that need to be involved that goes into the planning and execution of promotions. But if you get it right, if you're able to introduce data analytics techniques to help, that investment goes a lot farther, and you're ultimately able to deliver value, to deliver growth on top of that investment. So I mentioned factors and complexity. I'll just list a few here, and not to be exhaustive, but a few that kind of stick out. So supply chain. Obviously, I don't want to run a promotion if I don't have inventory to meet the demand that we expect from that promotion. So there's a layer of what are our inventory levels, but also a layer of getting the appropriate forecast of what we think a promotion will drive in terms of increase in volume. I mentioned the customer side, so and taking the lens of a manufacturer, of a CPG company, they ultimately want a win-win with retailers, with their customers. So how can you deepen relationships and trust and rapport with those customer teams? So ultimately, it's like thinking about how we can use data analytics to explain what's happening, to explain what we think will happen, and really to work with the customer to drive growth, to drive traffic. We talk about the planners, obviously dealing with lots of different data, lots of different pools, lots of different factors. And how do you wade through all those factors? Is a holiday coming up? Is there something happening in the world? Is there something trends we're seeing at the customer, particularly with other competitors promoting? So there's a lot to do, and do you think about it at a macro level, all of a category, all of a brand, or a micro level, product by product? External factors. So again, just a few examples here with weather, geopolitical, ESG. But how are those trends mattering? Why do they matter? Particularly with a lot of online sales now, is social media just more? It's telling us less. Our reviews online of products, what can we glean from that? And ultimately, maybe one tough to quantify, but maybe with panel data and other sources, but the shopper behavior. So we talked about changes in shopper behavior with trends and where they're buying and how they're buying. But a question we often ask is which customers are most valuable to us over the lifetime of the customer or some time period? Who's driving the biggest baskets? Who's driving the most frequent trips? And how do those different segments differ in their behavior? How do we place promotions that kind of work with those segments? Taking the same view here, but layering in kind of where do data analytics matter, or where can we come in and do something with them, whether it's an opportunity or even a challenge. Supply chain, a lot of data moving very quickly. We cannot have operational lapses. Our planning system can't be down. I think Deb and I could probably go on about this, is challenges in merging external data with internal data. So whether that's market data from IRI or Nielsen, or retailer specific. So that's obviously a challenge you have to solve for. And then another one that's interesting is how much do you standardize promotional planning? So our customers are very different. Our regions are very different. So can you recognize synergies and standardize to an extent? Probably a little bit, but you have to have that differentiation of customers behaving differently and having different bases of shoppers. Promotional planning, we talked about, complicated because there's lots of systems at play. There tends to be a lot of manual intervention, a lot of qualitative information as well, kind of descriptions of promotions, qualitative analysis. So we tend to see kind of sparse attribution in some cases, data quality not being great. So how can you make realistic or confident decisions? And you can say this about any case with external factors, but what matters and what doesn't, like what's important to consider and what isn't. And again, is a correlation, is a causation, is there even a correlation to begin with? I think a big thing is how can we identify white space or latent customer groups that we should look to pull into our category or our brand with a promotion. So there's a group of customers that we kind of analytically identify as being people who should be buying our products but aren't. How do we attract them? Promotions is a pretty good way to. And that's just one example. So in a minute or two, I'll hand it over to Deb, but just want to talk about the intersection of data engineering, data science, ML ops, and why doing this right and getting the integration and the approaches right can really have great benefits. So operational systems, we talked about supply chain, ERP. They have to work their operational, the day-to-day activities. You see the kind of symbiotic relationship between that and the trade promotion system, where you're planning your promotions. You need to ensure those expected needs and demand and inventory are going to be met. The general approach that we're seeing and is pretty common now is pulling data into a data lake. So that trade promotion information, those plans, sometimes the results, the post-event analytics are all coming into a data lake. Where you also have internal data, whether that's sell-in or master data, and then a good portion of external data, particularly for CPG and retail. There's tons of external data. So we're bringing that all together into a single place. And ultimately, where we see opportunity, what Deb will talk about in a minute, is how we take advantage of it, how we're using that data to make recommendations, to make decisions. And a few examples here. So forecasting is a big one. If our forecasts are accurate, then our supply chain is well tuned. I think we're seeing a lot around models to predict return on investment, incrementality, lift. Cannibalization is another big one. So how are we building models that an analyst or a planner can come in and see, if I do this, what do we think will happen? Anything we can help in explaining those scenarios, doing post-event analysis, that can be super impactful, not just for what's planned in right now, but what we're going to plan in the future. So I hope that helps sets it up. Deb can jump in from here, and she'll talk about kind of applying data science and MLOps to kind of solve some of these questions and give us another layer of depth. So Deb, feel free to take it from here.
So I'm going to start off just setting the stage a bit in terms of some of the common challenges that we're seeing across the industry right now in terms of our customers and actually getting these types of models into production so that they can actually provide business value. I'm going to cover some of the most relevant use cases that we've been working on most recently and how it's really helped accelerate the pace at which organizations have been able to extract value from data science investments. And then I'll jump into an actual demo, show some code and how, inspired by a recent use case, and then I'll pass it back to Ben and he'll take us home. So in terms of some of the common challenges that we're seeing across our customers, I'd say one of the biggest ones is scaling. So maybe you do have a model, but I think one of the biggest challenges is around, do you have the infrastructure, the resources, and the setup to bring it either to other parts of the business or like literally, train thousands of models at scale. I think having governance from like a senior leadership perspective, so are they aligned to the overall strategy, working between MLOps, data science teams, and then really duplicating different types of models and assets, feature stores, things like that across the organization can hinder sort of the speed and agility. Reliability, so do the users actually trust what you're putting in front of them? Are they able to understand it? Does it make sense to them? And then for sort of your products that are there, do you have some sort of incident resolution, service criticality in place to make sure that you're properly maintaining them? The resiliency piece, I think, is really key to any like software application that you're putting out there. But are things reproducible? Are you taking infrastructure as code approaches? Are you implementing proper like library versioning? Are things secure? And then accuracy is always going to be a challenge. So both sort of hitting that initial accuracy, maybe beating your baseline, but then also how do you maintain it in production? So do you have sort of the MLOps monitoring capabilities in place to make sure that you're staying ahead of things like model decay, performance degradation over time? So when I say MLOps, usually it's helpful to clarify what exactly I mean by that. So I'm really talking about the intersection of data engineering, data science, and DevOps. And what does that actually look like in practice in terms of how we deliver these types of projects? That means that we're typically starting off by laying out what's the business value, what are some of the existing baselines maybe that we need to beat to prove that something could be useful and provide actionable insights. Then we'll move into the actual experimentation phase. So this will be a lot of data engineering on the fly, that feature engineering, feature selection, training, testing those models, seeing how they perform, testing different algorithms. And then hopefully you get to a point where, you have sort of a no or a no-go decision on whether or not an experiment is worth taking to production. If it is, there might be some refactoring needed. You might want to, update certain parts of the code that you hadn't prioritized during experimentation so that it runs more smoothly in production, and then you'll deploy. And then once you're there, I think there are sort of two aspects. So both that monitoring bit that I had mentioned, so trying to stay ahead of drift and decay, and then also making sure that you're getting feedback from your users and sort of any potential and capturing potential enhancements for down the road and making sure that those also get integrated at some point. So this is all pretty theoretical. I'm going to talk a bit more about some of our specific use cases that we've been working on lately where we've been able to like really deliver value from sort of a trade promotions lens. So the first one is around price elasticities. So really looking to model the change in demand as a response to the change in price. So maybe this has a competitor lens to it. So you want to understand your sensitivity to changes in competitor analysis. But regardless, this typically involves quite a bit in terms of clustering. We see a lot of, unsupervised learning, but then also, business rules too, because typically the brand teams or the promotional planners, they have a very good sense of sort of who's competing with who. You want to understand what's happening across your channel. So this is, I think, pretty important to really understanding that consumer preference or changes in consumer behavior. So doing the same type of modeling across maybe digital and offline, and then within brick and mortar, are you looking at the different types of channels? And this involves typically a lot of regression. Cannibalization is very sort of hot topic, I would say, whenever you're thinking about promotion. So everybody wants to make sure that they're balancing, that feed of innovation, the new items that you're putting on the shelf, removing ones that aren't really contributing to your margin, your profitability, but then making sure that you're taking into account whether or not an item will get cannibalized. And to understand that, we have been doing quite a bit of modeling exercises around, decomposing potential indicators of cannibalization, building out recommendation engines for maybe how you should adjust your promotion for that set of items for at this retailer for future tactics, and typically quite a bit of like unsupervised learning and regression involved there. In terms of sort of some of where I think a lot of the opportunity is in this space is around sort of these emerging alternative and unstructured data sets. So thinking about things like coupons, images that are scraped off of websites, maybe images of the shelves, the planograms, and I think massive potential to use tools that allow you to combine those and really enhance them maybe with some of your existing data sets. And what's pretty cool about this is that you can leverage a lot of the out-of-the-box functionality from an AI services perspective to create models off of these types of data sets, really within sort of a few lines of code, typically if you're using like one of the AI APIs. So I think a lot of the challenges here are around getting the data, organizing it, combining it, and then once you do, there are tons of tools at your fingertips from like a computer vision perspective that can deliver quite a bit of new insights maybe that you would have never been able to see before. And then I think the last one, which has been quite interesting, especially sort of just what's been happening pre and post lockdown, has been doing a bit of A/B testing or sister store analysis. So if you cluster to identify similar stores, maybe you run sets of promotions at certain groups of stores, and then you purposely choose not to run them at the control stores. Applying models on top of those results can help you understand and give you more insights into the nature of what types of promotions may be more or less successful and why at these types of stores, which you can then use to inform for both future tests and future promo strategies in the long run. I'm gonna now talk about a more specific use case. So drawing from a recent engagement wherein the sort of types of questions that we were working with here were around, the importance of your different promo tactics to your uplift, how that's changed. So I have previous periods up here, but more specifically, we were very interested to understand what does the shift look like between models that are trained sort of in a pre-lockdown scenario to models that are trained in a post-lockdown. And then, with that in mind, with those learnings, what types of tactics are most effective for these types of promoted groups of products? So we have sort of lots of models trained on different types of time periods for comparison's sake, and thousands of models here potentially. We're using actually a Bayesian statistical analysis to really give us that tactic explainability. So how, what's the magnitude of importance of this type of tactic, and what's the sign of the impact, positive or negative? And we're sort of running these at scale. So thousands of models getting trained in a couple of hours in this instance. So I'm going to switch my screen now. So I'm now in a Databricks environment showing some of the notebooks that have been sort of anonymized and abstracted for demo purposes, but really just to give you a sense of what does this actually look like in practice. So the first notebook I have here is whenever we're starting off on any of these projects, you're going to be doing a ton of exploratory data analysis. So just trying to understand what does the distribution look like of promo techniques, right? So for this grouping of items that this retailer features seem to be the most important. What about if it's a holiday? Okay, it looks like discounts and price reductions and displays are a little bit more important, but it still seems like features for these items. This type of understanding of the data is going to be crucial to creating a successful model. So if you remember back to the questions that I have been asking before, how do we even start to build out an analysis where we're trying to understand how the importance of, a tactic, so let's say creating a display or running a feature, has changed from a pre-lockdown to a post-lockdown world, and how should we use that information to change our promo strategy? So we've created models for all of our different sort of clustered groupings of types of items. This is within a specific retailer, could be within a specific channel. We actually start off by just doing a basic linear regression to generate our first pass at what each of the coefficients are. So all of these coefficients here, my X1, my X2, my X3, these are all different promo tactics that I have in my data set, and I'm trying to use them to predict the relative uplift. So once I have those initial starting points for the coefficients, that's where the Bayesian model, which says we have some assumptions about our existing, our existing world, our existing environment, we have some probabilities there. Given this new information, what are our updated probabilities in terms of what we're trying to predict? So you can see here, I have all of my different coefficients, and each one of these corresponds to a different promotional tactic. I'm going to run the model. I'm passing it those initial linear regression coefficients, and then I can actually start to analyze what these results are telling me. So beta 0, beta 1, these are different promo coefficients. So let's say that this is for displays, right? And so I can see that the distribution of this coefficient, the likelihood of it is probably going to fall in between negative 25.6 and negative 25.5, right? And I can see as the model's taking, more and more samples over time, what it thinks that coefficient, right, that relationship between that tactic and uplift is. So this model is being trained on just pre-lockdown data. So it has no information about how people were shopping during the lockdown. If I do the same type of modeling analysis and I compare the coefficients between them to see how they've changed, right, for the same item at the same retailer, but really just trading it on a different time horizon, I can see pretty significant change in that coefficient. Why does that happen? There could be a variety of factors, right, in terms of the funding getting cut, but people just not going to stores as much. Maybe those displays or features are getting prioritized for hand sanitizer throughout. But the fact of the matter is I can see a distinct change in the relationship of that promo tactic to my predicted uplift. Ben's going to talk a bit more about some of the scenario modeling here, but hopefully this gives you a sense of how you can actually use these types of models to better understand what's happening in the world in a more sort of real-time sense. So hand it back to Ben.
Quickly talk a bit about this last demo and then close us out for today. So like Deb mentioned, we're able to pool some of these data sets into something like Power BI and visualize them. And this is something where we'd be bringing up planners or analysts into the fold and be able to take advantage of some of these analytics and different approaches. So this first screen, a bit of a summary, maybe something descriptive that tells us what's happening. So again, lift is something we very much care about with promotional planning. This promotion that we plan, what gain on base sales are we expected to get? Because that's a key measure, maybe the most important measure. So we could look at that across retailers and see across different categories or brands what the performance is. And then if we want to bring in, and again, this is where we talked about the different data sets that matter. If we bring in supply chain inventory levels, that's useful to be able to tell both kind of past analysis, but also kind of short-term what's upcoming. Where do we have a shortfall? Where do we potentially, where do we have a promotion planned that we need to be able to ensure inventory is like at appropriate levels? And And then, like Deb was talking about, maybe a bit more interesting is how we're bringing those scenarios in terms of future planning and behavior into something that we could present to a user, could be used kind of natively and in real time. So here we brought in a number of scenarios. I think we picked just one or two products for representation. But we have here, it looks like 11 different scenarios, and you can see the predicted uplift for each of those scenarios. And down below, you can see some diagnostics as to like what fit into the scenarios, and just have an example table here. You could add more or less to it, but we can see what's coming from displays, what's coming from features, and a few other factors that just help us see the effectiveness of that scenario. And you can see it's kind of interesting, as we might expect, a bit higher uplift after or kind of post-COVID or post-lockdown, just because more stores are open, more people are out. But a few scenarios actually seem to be predicted to be better actually pre-COVID or pre-lockdown, which is kind of interesting. So wondering where behavior has changed. And the other angle we can play here is kind of bringing our analysts and planners into the fold and working in real time. So something like this little app below, where you can select some of the inputs that Deb kind of mentioned, and some of the ones she did mention that kind of flow into the model. And be able to run a new scenario. So I have a few examples here. The type of promotion, is it buy one, get one free, buy one, get one half off, whatever it is. The length, the frequency, the depth, and there's probably a litany of other things you would put here. What is the product? But then, making a connection between something like Databricks and Power Apps or Flow, lots of different tools I think you could use. We can execute the scenario, the background refresh happens, and we could, a user could see that scenario kind of come through. So we're both kind of using analytics to help us in planning our promotions and predicting what will happen, but also bringing kind of a real-time nature to it to help analysts and planners to take full advantage of analytics investments, but also to kind of come alongside what's possible. So I'll jump back here and just close this up for today. Deb alluded to a number of different kind of common things that are common, but things we're seeing across our customers, and in the middle, example profile of some of our key CPG customers. The ones that stick out to me: e-commerce and omni, with shopper behavior kind of continuing to fluctuate and evolve is pretty interesting. Sustainability, supply chain right now with all the disruption is pretty interesting, but lots of other ones just for reference. And just a few things here on kind of areas where we're seeing kind of our customers investing in places that we're helping to give reference. Doing exploratory analytics, so taking some business questions or kind of open prompts and using various techniques and data sources to help provide an answer. Deb talked about, and we didn't necessarily so beyond the scenes, but implementing MLOps and DevOps, either frameworks or patterns, or just kind of using them during experimentation through to deployment of solutions. We look to the first bubble on exploratory analytics: industrialization of experiments, so scaling for all our categories or all our brands, all our markets, whatever it might be, productionizing and operating with efficiency. So analytics architectures, whether you're kind of getting started, not sure how you're going to scale, not sure where to start, helping customers at different levels there to talk about the tools that make sense and understand their needs and patterns. Beyond the kind of a huge topic, but data democratization, I think in the same way Deb talked about referenceability of models and bringing analysts or planners along the journey. How are you kind of bringing your entire firm or organization, kind of bringing them data, developing technical savviness and technical capability, and ultimately looking at that with analytics as well? How are we bringing analytics on top of that data to fruition? So along the same lines, empowerment, things like training and upskilling. And the last two here, a bit broader, but multi-cloud and analytics strategies. One of those are strategies around people or data or processes, seeing kind of different things that our customers are working on, and also layering in how the rapid advances in technology, how we keep up with that one, but how we take advantage of it and how we make the right plays and the right investments. A couple of examples here, of course, reach out to Deb or I to talk about them, to learn more. And a special shout out to a number of our colleagues that have helped build the majority of this and did a lot of the thought leadership to bring it together. So thank you for your time today. Hope you enjoyed the session and learned something from it, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.